was horrible. I was like, ugh. I like washed my eyes, washed my soul. Welcome to part 3 and the final chapter of my adventure in Geneva, working for a prince. We're going to talk about the children and then also what's up with this title, the prince, and was he really a prince and what the heck, and maybe talk a little bit about James the butler as well. So I'm gonna start with Regina, the oldest daughter. Well, she was oldest of that, I don't know, like that series of children, because he had two sets of kids in England, or sorry, one set of kids in England that were in their 30s, the two boys that lived near him in their 20s, but they were born in Paris, so I call them like the Paris brothers. And then there were also two children with their mother in America that had left him, and I didn't know very much about them, but I did meet the two siblings from England. They actually came with us to the chateau, and they were kind of doing their own thing. They weren't as around as the two 20-year-old brothers. I don't know how many children he had and why he had so many children. Hillary, she was much more with it than me. I was kind of like, I don't know, like, she was like, no, he has this kind of mental, I guess it's like a mental thing, like a psychological condition of fear of death. I mean, he was not afraid of death, but of wanting to immortalize himself, and so he just like kept having children to sort of do that. But one of the literary assistants found in the downtown, where they lived downtown, which was actually his apartment that they lived in, and they would write for him, and he would come in and write with them and collaborate. There was a box of all of these court cases of paternity, paternal court cases, and it would say like he denies paternity, he denied. Sorry, my camera fell. But essentially, in this box of paternity cases, he denied paternity, and in the end, it said like undeniably you are the father. So he has a box full, so to speak, of children. Yeah. So first, to start with Regina, the oldest, she was 10 years old, and she would, I remember her having these meltdowns and being really emotional and talking about how hard it was that she didn't have a mother. And I remember one of the staff was like, oh, she's just really dramatic. They were really close to the woman who did their laundry. She had been there for a long time, I think 6 years or something, or maybe 5 years. And so there was some maternal, I think, connection there. But there was just a lot of navigating this really hard thing of they didn't know what happened to their mother, or they were told she died in a car accident, but just lots of lack of closure, like they didn't have photos of her, and also the fact that they thought they were all from the same mother is kind of crazy. The biggest personality of all the children was Roxana, by far. She was the youngest, 7. She had a crazy temper. I remember when we were in Alsace, France, at the chateau or at the castle, she wanted something, and she was whining to one of the French-speaking staff in French. She put her foot down, like, no, and then she went over to me and started whining in English, and I said no, and then she went over to her aunt and started whining in Arabic, and it just her fluency, like, these kids, they spoke English, French, Arabic, they spoke German, and they were learning Chinese as well, or they were learning German in school. Her father admired her the most. She was only 7, so of course she was, she hadn't gone through puberty or anything, but he always commented on her weight and how she's fit and sporty and how Regina needed to be, and Lola, should be more fit. Or at one point he like grabbed Lola's stomach and was like, this is laziness, this is just like so psychologically damaging. I can't imagine as a 9-year-old girl having your father do that. So there was so much emphasis on that. I remember at dinner, so we would read from the world record book while they ate, you know, might as well just like bust out our like palm leaves and grapes to feed them. But we were the entertainment at dinner. And everything had to be nonfiction when the prince did not like us introducing that. He thought fiction was kind of pointless, but I digress. And, you know, I was reading about the man who could hold his breath the longest or something, and Roxana was acting up, and so I had to take her out of the dining room and bring her upstairs and put her in timeout. And she started scratching me and biting me and spitting, and she was just, you know, she was small so I could contain her, but like I did get some scratches on my calves and things. And I put her in her room, and we had had lots of, you know, butting heads before when I had to teach her about nouns and verbs, and she just like get up and run off and throw a fit. And I was like, Roxana, you're such a killjoy. I was like, that's a noun. And the other nanny laughed. It's just like, I don't know what to do. You don't know what to do sometimes because you don't have that, it's very difficult as hired help. You don't want to overstep your boundaries. But, so I took Roxana up to her bedroom and put her in there. And I was talking to her through the bedroom door and saying, you know, let me know when you want to come out, like you just need to calm down kind of thing. And the older brother, Russ, the 20-year-old brother, was in his father's room reading something, and I could tell he was listening, and he just kind of came up like smirking and was like, you know what? He's like, this is more of a job for like a big brother, like step aside. I was like, okay, have at it. And I went back downstairs into the dining room, and he came down moments later or a couple minutes later and without Roxana. So I went back upstairs to see what had happened. It was really quiet in the room. I knocked on the door and it was really quiet, so I went in, and Roxana was on the floor really quiet looking down. And I was like, Roxana, what's going on? Are you ready to come down to dinner? And she was like, don't ever do that again. And I was like, do what? She's like, don't let Russ in here again. And it threw a red flag. I didn't know what she meant by that. I don't know what he had said or done. But I was like, okay. And then she like wrapped her arms around my neck, and I picked her up and I took her downstairs. And I put her in her seat, and there was Russ. Like, it was just such a strange, and I would say like Rufus, who was the 8-year-old, one of the 8-year-old twins, he was talking about his brothers or wanting connection or family connection or something. I'm like, oh, well, Ron and Russ really love you. And he was like, yeah, we were driving. He's like, yeah, and then he was like quiet for a moment. He was like, but not really. And I just was like, you kids are so smart. They were very aware, very astute. Just like with their father, it was so hard because sometimes they would really not respect any of us and, you know, could care less. And then other times they really just had this desire to have connection, and they responded really well to authenticity. And so Jared was the twin to Lola, and he had, as a twin, he had his umbilical cord wrapped around, I didn't know this until later, wrapped around his neck. So he had some, I don't know if it was brain damage, but something happened with the lack of air. I don't know what that's called, like natal asphyxiation, maybe, I don't know. But he broke his arm while skiing. He's the one who also threw the ski pole through the window of the car, and then went running through the snow, like around trying to evade his father, as his father was like, come talk to me, Jared. So he broke his arm. I had to take him to the doctors pretty regularly after that, and he also would go for things related to his whatever is going on with his mind at the time that they needed to work on. He didn't really talk a lot, and he would just kind of like stick his tongue out at me if I was trying to engage him in a conversation. And so finally I just stuck my tongue out at him again, like back, and he laughed and he thought it was great. And so I was like, okay, this is how I have to communicate with Jared. But at night we would do Jared in the universe, and so it was a series. I would tell him the series of adventures that he would go on in the story, and that was the only thing I could leverage with him. If he wasn't listening, that was the only thing I could say, like, well, if you want to do the story tonight, we have to brush our teeth, or we have to do whatever. And that was really sweet and really fun. I think if it had been a situation where the nannies were more respected, or we had more authority, I think it could have been easier. But because it was like you were kind of just like grasping at straws to have enough leverage to get them to listen, it became really exhausting. And when I was taking him, this was towards the end of my stay there, I'd already decided like I was gonna leave, and Hillary did too, who had joined me from England. And so one of the nurses pulled me aside after, I don't know if she had been having like a psychology session with Jared, but she was asking questions about, the home life and what was going on. And I felt so betraying, but I just told her everything. I was like, I don't know, like, I think they were told like their mother died in a car accident, but I don't think that's the case. I think they're all from surrogate mothers, and that I think it was confusing to her. I don't know with his birth records or what she was looking at. There must have been some red flags, because I think they were brought over from the States. At least Roxana was. James, the butler, went and got her from the US. I told the nurse, I was like, it wasn't just that he told them that their mother died in a car accident. He was really, would turn on a dime and be pretty verbally, they were afraid of him. Like the fact that Jared was running through the snow trying to escape him because he put the ski pole through the window. At the time, the prince was like, oh no, and he was in that mode of just being really forgiving, and he's kind of laughing about it. But I could understand where Jared was coming from, because before, when the prince went to Paris for a culinary book he had helped produce or something, he's like, this is the best book in the world, it's got the award for the best book in the world or whatever. And then he wanted a picture of all the children when he got home kissing the book, and the kids were all excited and they wanted to be in the, with him and like celebrating. And then he just got tired of it, and he's like, go, now go, and he would become really abrupt. So there was just a lot of, I think, psychological whiplash. And so I kind of expressed to the nurse that there was some stuff at home. I said, I'm leaving soon. I don't, please don't bring this up until I'm gone. But I kind of shared with her everything I saw. The fact that that Roxana went to a different school than Rufus and Reggie. And Regina went to her own school. Jared and Lola went to the same school, but he kept them all separate, so that way there wasn't any question about the small gap of age, so they wouldn't wonder about it. And they were pretty isolated, because they would get questions like, oh, is that your grandfather? Because he was in his 70s when he had all of these young children, or 60s. So I do feel kind of bad that I sort of brought it up to the nurse, but at the same time, I think she could see that Jared was suffering from more than just his physical ailments. He was having some psychological issues as well. The prince was really intent on all of the children attending either Cambridge. He said they can only attend Cambridge, Oxford, I think Harvard, or University of Lausanne or Yale. That's it. He said there's no other schools they can go to. I don't want them reading anything that's not fact. Even though he told all of these fictions about their life, they had to read about facts only, which is why we read the Guinness Book of World Records. Fact, 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 and no fiction. And I just was like, I think Tolkien, he's like, no Lord of the Rings. And I was like, Tolkien taught at Oxford. But he was very into that intellectual status, that if you hadn't attended these universities, or, you know, he just had these really concrete ideas of what success for his children looked like, and I gotta hand it to him. He spoke 5 languages: French, German, English, Chinese, and Arabic. So he was obviously an international banker. He was in oil, a very successful, wealthy man. He wrote all these books about other characters. He wrote fiction. That's the funny thing. He wrote fiction, and he wouldn't write the truth of his own story, which was when he was a child. He would go from leather factory to leather factory, like with a donkey or something, with his father. Like really cool stories about his life. And he it was just so interesting that he had all of this incredible childhood, and he never spoke about it. There's something about, like, he was getting older, but he had been like an encyclopedia. He was incredibly brilliant, and that was a huge part of his appeal. Even besides his wealth, he was just so well cultured. He knew every single painter that ever existed. He was so educated in art history and finance and world affairs. And it was really sad to see that decline, like with his diabetes and that spyglass. Though the reason I brought that up was because Hillary was like, I think that he can see just fine. He uses it as like a ruse to like make you off guard if he can see very clearly. She's like, sometimes I swear he can like see me from like a mile away, and he'll like turn and but that he did have supposedly that degeneration is just hard to see in anybody that has that kind of brilliance, you know. And the fact that he came from such humble beginnings, which brings me to, is he a prince? And so I spoke with one of the literary assistants who went to Oxford, so she should pass his test of reputability, intellectual rigor, or whatever. She said that where he said like Alexandria, like it wasn't Alexandria, I can't tell you where it's from otherwise, you know, but it's a dead city. It's a city that, or it's an old city that doesn't exist anymore. She's like, a historian told him that a bunch of princes lived in that area back in 200 AD or something. I'm not sure when, but she said it's like saying, oh, I'm the princess of Babylon. Like Babylon doesn't exist anymore. So he could have had a genetic connection to, but there wasn't a direct one, but he did insist on being called Prince to Alexandria. The butler told me, James told me, like, you need to stand up whenever he walks into a room. And he would meet with the Queen of England. While I was there, they went to visit the Queen of England, and he had visited with politicians. So he's very connected. Like one time all the children were being really loud, like my second day there, and he was like yelled at them, and he was like, I'm on the phone with the president of Switzerland, whatever. So he was really brilliant, well-connected person who kind of embellished, I think, his status with that title, but it was very much ingrained. And he loved to just, I think he had such a sense of fun, like humor about, he took himself seriously as a prince, but not really, like everything was really on a deeper level, kind of a joke. Like Hillary said, it was a perfect moment where the painter in Geneva, at the Geneva home, they were trying to hold up this painting to see how it would look, and then the prince was like, come on, come help us. So Hillary and I were both like holding up this painting with the painter and with the prince, and we were all and she's like, this is a perfect ending to our stay. Like this encapsulates everything about it, that it was just this crazy, fanciful, for the hell of it when he felt like it kind of inclinations that he had. And I told that painter when I left, I was like, do not paint me in that bathroom with all the can girls. Don't do it. And he's like, you weren't here long enough, because I was only there for 4 months. He was like, no, but they might have, I don't know. Actually, I really don't care. But I said to him, I was like, American, he was from New York. I was like, American to American, do not paint me. That's the thing, like, because he had this more humble background, in a way it gave him more of a leg up in a world where everyone else around him had so much privilege. And I don't know if that's why he sometimes had this respect for his staff. Like, yeah, he would say horrible things sometimes, but he also had a side to him that understood work and hard work. And he had a dinner in Geneva where he sat all the kids down and he had us come down. Regina wanted to go over to her friends and he said no, and I forgot why, or he didn't want the people to come over, her friends to come over. Again, it was all this secrecy and trying to keep their identity under wraps and everything, that he had to keep everyone kind of at bay to keep his kind of lie going about their mother. And he said, look, you can go off and do your own thing, talk to any of my literary assistants, talk to Christina. People work really hard in the West. You can go do that, go live in an apartment, whatever. Like, basically like this trash, like these people, these Americans, these Britons, and like, you can go live like them, or you can have the protection of the family and have lots of money and just listen to the rules. So really, he had stipulated in his will after his death too, what they needed to do in order to keep collecting the money. And so it was never a done deal. It's like he was controlling them beyond the grave. When we were in Paris, after the holidays, we were all gonna go back to Geneva and we were gonna order food and nobody could decide what to eat. And I was just like tidying or trying to keep myself busy, and I was picking something up off the ground, and he was sitting down at the table in a bathrobe, and I like got up, and for a second, like his legs were spread wide open and I almost gagged. It was horrible. I was like, ugh. I like washed my eyes, washed my soul. I can't unsee that. But we were all in that room and everyone was like, I want this, I want this, I want to try this, and nobody could agree. And so he would do this thing again, went back to his nature of just being playful and like not really giving a shit. Like, he just didn't care. He said, well, we can do this or we can do this. And he kind of presented all these different options and nobody could agree. He's like, you know what? I think we just shouldn't eat. Lots of people every day, who eats dinner? Nobody, most of the world doesn't eat dinner, or something like that. Like, the rest of the world doesn't do this. So, and he just kind of threw everything out. And I don't know even if we ended up ordering dinner, but he just had this like whimsical way of just upsetting the apple cart and completely destabilizing everybody. And I think, again, it came from that place of like, you guys don't know what my life was like. None of them really could, like, he was alone in a lot of ways. Everyone was there like to take from him. And so he could play that role. He could be the person that was like, I don't care. I remember there was a moment at the chateau or in Alsace during the holiday, during Christmas, and all the kids were playing soccer or football. We call it the wrong thing. It's football. And and again, it was really, there were so many moments that were really endearing and sweet too. And I think that's the most important thing to realize when talking about people in general, but just people you meet. Like, there's so many different facets and different angles to things, and this is completely my own perception, and I could be way off with my assumptions, and I think it's so important to keep that room for, you know, the mystery of the person and who they are, because he would love to play with them, and he was wearing like his sweater over his head and a hat, and he looked like homeless because he has dirty sneakers, these like sweats on, and he was playing with them in the sun, like it was to protect himself from the sun. And it was just so charming. It was, they were having so much fun, and and there were I remember when I asked for just more time off, and I caught him playing in just randomly, I came home early and I saw him playing in the front yard in Geneva with them after the holiday, and they were having so much fun playing together, and there were moments like that were just really heartwarming, and yeah, not everything's black and white. It was a really crazy experience, but in some ways he was like such an incredible father. He did one-on-ones with the children. He would take them out and just have one-on-one time with them. He had a book where he recorded everything that they had said as children, or funny things they said, that the kids say the darndest things kind of thing, and he captured all of that. So he was such a multifaceted, interesting person, and I think that's why it kind of stuck with me for so long, because I've tried so hard to put it in a box and say like this is what it was as an entire experience, but there are ripples of it and pieces of it, and little glimpses into a deeper reality of who this person was, and that forever makes it impossible for me to kind of put it all in a box. But here, I know I could go on and on and on, but I'm just going to wrap it up with some interesting, crazy things. First of all, I told you about how Ron and Russ did not like the butler, James. They actually had a bat with his name on it. Like, they disliked him that much. They're like, one day we will use that bat. I don't know. And there was a moment when we were walking, my ankles would rotate in, and I wasn't wearing supportive boots in the snow, and Lola was watching me, and she was like, oh, and she's like, so you do have a problem in life. And I think she just thought that was my only problem, and I was like, girl, I got a lot of problems. We went to a birthday party that it was this really powerful Irishman and his wife, and there's so many expats in Geneva, and so the prince went off to speak with him, and after we left the party, he said something about the wife, like she can hardly even walk, or she can hardly even move, and it was one of those things again where I was like, wow, he doesn't seem to really like women. And in his bathroom in the castle in France, I mentioned all those other paintings from different times in history with him and his sons, and his, he had, in his bathroom were paintings of like all these naked women, just like an Eden of naked women. It was really, again, that kind of kitschy style of painting, but it was like head to toe, like floor to ceiling in the bathroom. Yeah, and so, I say all of that about him playing with his children, but I remember in 2010 was when the Haiti earthquake happened, and it was completely devastating, and it kind of shook the whole world, and the two older sons were talking about it at dinner, and I was in there, I think, reading the Book of World Records or whatever, and he was like so irritated, and he was like, oh, they all would have died anyway. And so again, yeah, it keeps going back and forth. It's like a ping pong ball. Like, who is this person? Like, on the one hand, seeming so much like a caring father, and on the other hand, just saying things like that were really shocking. Also, on the trip back home, we drove in like a caravan from Alsace down to Paris, and in that drive, I think they had the cars shipped up there so we could drive back. I think that's what happened. And so Ron and Russ do not like the butler, but Ron was sitting in the front seat with the butler, James, driving. For some reason, James was trying to say like the first man that's mentioned in the Bible, or the first man of significance or something, was a manservant, how important the manservant is, and kind of like trying to talk himself up, sort of like his position. And Ron was just like, no, it's not. Like, just kind of shut him down. All these tensions between the two of them, between the three of them, Ron and Russ and James. There was really sad moments too, like Lola said that she would write letters to her mom because she knew she was in heaven, and she'd leave them on her windowsill, and she was like, oh, but she never writes back. And that was really, like, towards the end, it was really sad when they found out we were leaving. Reggie, who was like this, he was the sweetest kid, he's like, oh, we're celebrating that you're leaving. And the prince said after Hillary and I, like when he found out Hillary and I were leaving, he's like, no more nannies. He was just done with nannies. He didn't want to do nannies anymore. And I don't know, a part of me still wishes that I had maybe stayed a little longer to have been able to form a deeper connection and to learn French fluently. And Geneva is such an amazing city. But it was such a feeling of lack of freedom. You were completely, when you live under someone else's roof in that situation, you really, even though it's like bored, you're just so immersed. You don't go home. And I remember one of my first jobs going home, when I would clock in, it felt so luxurious. I was like, I love just leaving work at home. And I don't know, I feel like a quitter in some ways, that I should have been able to stay on, but it was just really the treatment, the way they treated staff ultimately was that you were so much lower. And I think that could have really affected how I saw myself in the job market moving forward, how I saw myself moving forward in general. So yeah, I needed to get out. But I actually looked up the children recently before I started doing this series to see where they were at. I found a few of them on Facebook, and they're fully grown, and they're all fully grown. It's crazy. Their time flew by so fast, and yeah, I'm sure they're moving and shaking the world. They're all so educated and brilliant children, and really resilient too. And that concludes my 4-month stint with the prince, and thank you so much for watching. It's been really fun to retell some of these crazy moments. And like my husband said, he's like, no one's really gonna ever understand kind of what it was like or what you went through, but I feel like this is really, I feel like, yeah, I feel like you do get such a sense of it, you know. And it's been really almost cathartic to talk about it, because I haven't really talked about it before. So thank you for joining me, and we'll see you next time. Bye.